So, in bowel cancer, do we have a test like that? And we have a test which is goes part of the way to fulfilling these criteria. Because we know that cancers bleed, and therefore quite a number of years ago, many years, about 30 years ago, it was thought that if we were to look for small traces of blood in the feces, then perhaps we might be able to pick up cancer at an early stage before it started, bleeding lots and causing symptoms. And that's where this idea came from. And that is what we use today as the primary screening test. We use a test which detects small traces of blood in the feces. Now, there are other approaches, and I am going to come on to them a little bit later if we have time. But this is the primary test that we use in bowel cancer. So basically, colorectal cancer or bowel cancer is a disease which is suitable for screening. However, it's very important to appreciate that when you pick up a disease through screening, so you give somebody a test, the test is positive, you investigate them, you find they have a cancer. You find that cancer is early and you treat it and you pat yourself on the back and say how clever we are, we've really cracked this. However, there are certain biases which are built into screening that we have to overcome. And the most important perhaps is a bias called lead time bias. Now, does anyone know what lead time bias is? I know there are some people that know what lead time bias is, looking at them. But for those of you who don't know what lead time bias is, I'll try to explain it. In that the problem with picking up a disease early is that there is an interval between picking up the disease at an asymptomatic stage and picking up a disease at a stage where it's symptomatic. Now, if you pick up a disease before it's symptomatic, you will appear to live for, 10 months. Whereas if you'd waited till it was symptomatic, you would have appeared to live for only 3 months. But in fact, you haven't elongated the person's life at all. So the problem with that is you've got to know that treating the disease at an early stage is better, actually stops more people dying of the disease than just waiting till symptoms occur. Because you will always appear to do better with early disease because you've just picked it up at an earlier point in time. Does everybody understand that? But it's a real problem. It's a real problem because screening will always appear to be great because early disease always does better, but it may just be a pure artifact of just pushing back the time of diagnosis. There are other issues. For example, if you invite a population to be screened, if I was to invite everybody here to be screened, some of you would do it and some of you wouldn't. And if we divided, maybe not this particular group of people, but if we divided the people into those who do the test when offered and the people who don't do the test when offered, there are two very different populations. The people who do the test tend to be people who look after themselves. They tend not to smoke. They tend to take exercise, they tend to be relatively healthy, and therefore they will do well. Whereas people who don't take up the offer of screening tend, this isn't an absolute rule, but in terms of statistics, they tend to be people who don't care so much about their health. They tend to smoke, they tend not to take exercise, and therefore they don't do well, no matter what sort of disease they have. So by screening, you're picking out early disease, you're picking out a healthy population. And the other thing about screening is a thing called length bias. So if you screen every 2 or 3 years, whatever it is, you'll tend to pick up disease which is relative, and you'll miss it with the screening because it's fast growing and nasty disease. So you're selecting out a group of people and a group of cancers who are going to do well. So how on earth do we get around that? Is this all just an illusion? Are we just doing this and it's an illusion? Do you know? Does anyone have any idea how we might actually solve this problem? Who knows here what a randomized controlled trial is? Does anyone know what a randomized? Can anyone put their hands up to know what a randomized controlled trial is? Okay, so maybe about half the audience. So what you have to do to prove that screening actually works is you've got to take a population and you've got to divide them into two on a totally random basis. And in one group, you offer them screening, and in the other group, you don't offer screening. And then you see how many people die of the disease that you're screening for in the two populations. And that's the only way you can be absolutely sure that your screening is working. Because otherwise, these biases that we're talking about may be explaining the whole thing. So studies like that have been done. There have been 4 randomized controlled trials of bowel cancer screening using a test to pick up blood in the world. The first was carried out in Minnesota. The second 2, well, I don't know exactly the timing, but the next 2 were carried out in Nottingham and in Denmark, and the third was carried out in Sweden. And all of them showed a significant reduction in the number of people who died from colorectal cancer in the group that was offered screening. Now that's not just the people who were screened, because it took into account the people who were offered screening and didn't want it, but the whole group that was offering screening appeared in these studies to reduce the death rates between about 15 to 30%, depending on the study. So there's very good and consistent evidence that this works in a population sense.